So, welcome back to the Ego Actus reading series. We are back with women's drama, a series done by Ego Actus that features all female playwrights. And today I'm really happy to bring in Jessica with Secret Agents, a brother, a sister, secret, and James Bond, a vivid fantasy life of secret agents, of promises for a brilliant and brave life ahead. The story about love and espionage in the time of AIDS. Welcome, Jessica. I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
For sure. I think we just dive on in. This is a play
Sure.
that when I read it, I was blown away. It's a story with a lot in there, right?
Yeah.
And the story itself kind of slides between realism, a memory, this kind of dreamlike state, and we're even going into spy state with the mention of James Bond. It's a lot of elements. So I'm wondering what was the most exciting and the most challenging parts of writing this kind of play with so many moving parts.
Well, that's a great question. And the truth is that this is sort of how I write. So I've written close to 40 plays. I've been a theater maker for decades, and I find that my mind works in a kind of collage that
Mm,
especially for very personal work, and this is very personal, I I feel that it's not a conscious choice to say engage magical realism or memory or anything else. I'm about to premiere a new play, which is a nine-person ensemble play where
whoa.
yeah, where there's so many balls in the air. But this is kind of what I do. It's the way my mind works. It works in a kind of poetic frame. Um, and certainly this story could have been told in a very like straightforward kitchen sink, straight play drama way. And there's no way that I could have tackled the emotion around the play in this way. And
Mm,
I think it has to do with the reason I wrote this play, but also it is a quality of my work and my life. I am uh, my company is called the Heat Collective, which is stands for Healing, Education, Activism, and Theater. And I've never been able to make a choice. Am I an actor? Am I a playwright? Am I a drama therapist? Am I
mm,
and it's just I've come at this late stage to accept that I think and work and dream uh, in not a linear way. So
mm.
if that helps, does that answer your question at all?
It does. It does. I feel like you need to have a certain way of thinking when you're tackling play, not even of that kind of topic, but just with so many moving parts. I feel like
Yeah.
your mind needs to go to those different directions. And
Well,
I do applaud you for it because it must be a challenge.
it is a challenge, and yet it is, well, first of all, it's the way I write, but it's
Yeah.
also that I write as an actor. I was an actor first. I My first love was Shakespeare as an actress, and then
Mm,
I went to the experimental theater wing at NYU at the very beginning of that program and kind of learned that an artist is responsible, whether acting or writing or directing or teaching, to bring meaning to the work in whatever way and to challenge themselves with form as
mm,
well as content. And then finally, I went and trained in a method in a Meisner program
mm.
and learned about method acting and how to craft an emotion. So I really work with actors in mind. My plays don't make sense, I think, until you hear them, and they need actors who can embrace the paradox, um, to kind of find that poetry, but still stick to a true, full character-driven
Mm.
narrative, as well as a non-linear one.
Yeah. So let's talk about the content. I'm going to go
Yeah,
slightly out of order. So I'm going to
sure,
ask you the
sure.
big question, right?
Yeah.
So why secret agents
Well,
for many people who are listening to it, it feels a little disconnected. So, a
does it?
story about siblings, a story about AIDS, a story about James Bond, how does that all fit in together?
Well, very simply, my brother, who is actually my first cousin, but we grew up as brother and sister, died of AIDS in 1992.
Mm,
And the two of us spent our childhood playing secret agents in the basement. We were very affected by James Bond, as well as Get Smart, as well as the Avengers and Mission Impossible, and all those programs, the TV programs that were on, and the James Bond movies that we were exposed
mm,
to in the, 60s, pretty much in the 60s and very early
mm,
70s, but mostly the 60s. And that kind of, and I grew up in, my cousin Ezra was mostly in Michigan, but I was in the Haight-Ashbury and I lived across the street from Janis Joplin, and there was a kind of
yeah.
wildness to my life, and I craved that. There's even, well, no, that's in another play. I'm sorry, that's another monologue from a different play. But I I really craved that sort of clean, sleek, uh, clear, wonderful world of of spies. It was an
Mhm.
escape from the chaos that I was living in. And every time I saw Ezra, which was every holiday, and then when he lived in California, it was every single day, we would go into this fantasy land that had a whole moral code. We didn't have color TVs back then. We were middle class kids and only rich people had color. Back then we had black and white. But we decided to, so it was very, very, very regimented. We had a red plastic phone and we would take, and this started at around 7 or 6, and it went until we were nearly teenagers when Ezra's older sister, my cousin, shamed us in front of her cool teenage friends and said, this is the little kids, secret agents game. And we were so embarrassed that we sort of never talked about it again. But but it was where we decided that the criminals, so we would get calls on this red plastic phone, and we would get a full character description of the criminal, and we would draw it and write it, and then we would put them in prison. We would catch them and put them in prison, but in every prison cell there was a color TV because we
Mm.
figured that rehabilitation came with kindness and luxury. And so every criminal, redeemed himself. We went through a laundry down a secret, you know, elevator, very similar.
Yeah.
Sorry for the New York noises in the background. It's impossible to have quiet in this city.
You can't quiet New York City.
And quiet New York City. Um, so we lived a very we this fantasy world was very much at the heart of our relationship and our lives as children. And then we grew up, and we worked together many times, and I went into the theater at NYU and he went into the film department at NYU, and we graduated together. And then a few years later he contracted HIV, and then it went to full-blown AIDS, and he
Mm.
died right right when I had just given birth to a child, my first child. He was only 32 and he died uh, a horrible death. And that was
Yeah.
right before, it was just like right before they found the cocktail that could have saved him, and we were working
Mm.
hard to find that. But um, at his funeral, when I was going down, I was so devastated and so lost. And I started writing a eulogy, which it turned out that I didn't have the opportunity to give at that particular funeral. And devastated again, I sort of held it in and then wrote this play.
Mm.
And my dear, dear friend, Peter Page, who who is now, kind of famous for his Queer as Folk role. But he and I performed this for 7 years, and we performed it in Portland, Oregon. We performed it in Los Angeles at length at the LA Gay and Lesbian Center, and tried to raise money for AIDS research. And I love the play, and they tried to bring it to New York, and it never made it. They were shooting too high. The producers wanted to bring it to Broadway, and it really
Mm,
was too big a jump for that. But then it just stopped, and I've it was published, and I've I've wanted to revisit it for a long time. And when Joan Kane asked me to be a part of this, I gave her a choice of several plays of mine that I wanted to revisit, and this is the one that she chose. So
yeah.
that's sort of my story about it, but it's very, very personal, and it is a eulogy and a love song to my
Yeah.
dear Ezra Litwak.
I was going to say this is very personal. And when I read the script, right at the top, there's that dedication
Yeah.
to Ezra. So I kind of wonder then, from let's call it the more practical approach, what was it like writing this kind of story that felt so personal? It feels like there was a lot of moving around with grief and maybe
Yes.
even acceptance and the frustration and
Yeah.
anger.
Yeah.
So I'm curious what that approach was like, right? From a personal angle of what you were going through and what your loved ones were going through, as
Yes.
well as from the theater point of view of I am writing this play that there are some practical elements to it. What was
Yes.
it like trying to balance those two together?
That's a very good question. I, first of all, wrote from my heart. I wrote the eulogy, and I was a new mother when I wrote it. So I had little babies, and I was dealing with what does it mean to have someone that I fully counted on just suddenly gone. And then it sort of made, I found out that Ezra was dying right after the birth of the baby. I mean, he kept it a secret from me and his sister, and my father is the one who came over and told me. And I had this tiny newborn in my arms, and I handed her to my husband at the time. I had to get her out of my hands because I didn't want her to absorb the grief that that I was feeling. And AIDS was such a terrible, terrible, and I went to many, many, many funerals.
Mm,
And I think that I was writing my grief, but also as a new mother. So there was a real vulnerability to that. And when we finally performed it, we did a whole run of it in Los Angeles with Peter and a wonderful actor, George Hertzberg, who played James Bond. And my kids were little, and they were, my husband had left at that point. I was a single mom, but there was a sense of family around this play from the beginning. The LA Gay and Lesbian Center had this enormous, beautiful theater that Lily Tomlin and her partner had funded, and there was always a green room with the TV for the kids. There was just
yeah.
a real loving environment there. So I'm no, no, no. I just jumped around a lot and didn't really answer your question, but I think that for me, it was intuitive. It, it wasn't a structural plan to write a play like this. It was really a love song that came out. And then luckily, the people around me, John Imperato, Sue Hamilton, Peter Page, the people that were wanting to produce and bring this to life just supported the process. And I began to try to create a well-made play out of my grief
Mm,
and my dreams, but it wasn't really, that wasn't the purpose of it at the
mm,
beginning.
mm.
It was to write that eulogy that I
I
never
mean,
got to
it's
say.
beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you
It
so
really
much.
is beautiful. And it's great to see that kind of support throughout the years.
Yeah.
And it finally comes here, right, to 2025 with Ego Actus, with Joan and Bruce, and all the other wonderful female playwrights.
Yes.
So I'm
Yes.
glad it's had this kind of journey, despite the very sad uh reason for creation, right?
Yeah,
Um,
and I think that it's interesting that Joan chose this because I think that right now we need to start talking about things again. I have that little
mm,
baby girl who was born when Ezra was dying is now a trans man,
mm,
and I feel very protective of his rights in this current climate, and I feel protected of queer rights, and I think the AIDS crisis was a it was a very, very crazy and intense and scary, and I don't think we should forget it. And I think we have to keep remembering that that is a time in our history when men and women died with
mm.
such frequency that it was hard to believe. But I'm pleased to be doing it again, and hopefully there's humor and espionage to keep people to not, it's not a tragic, miserable play. It's a play with light.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you've also answered my other question, which was, what do you hope resonates with the audience? And I agree, especially now, right? These types of conversations and this level of remembrance should be acknowledged, and we shouldn't be forgetting that. And I think it's wonderful that you have this kind of story for Ezra, for all of those in that terrible time of AIDS. But I do have one more question
Of
for you.
course, of course, yes.
So, reading your play, the James Bond that you have seems to be, and I think if I had the description right, based a lot around our first James Bond, Mr.
Yes,
Sean Connery.
yes,
I
absolutely.
do have to ask, is Sean Connery your number one James Bond, or do you find that there are several different James Bonds that speak to you?
Well, I like Daniel Craig. I'm
Mm,
really hoping that the next one is a James Bond of color. I have some desires, but I won't say them, but I think that I'm looking forward to the next one. I really like Daniel Craig. I grew up with Sean Connery, so for me, his kind of cool, his kind of humor, that and that's the thing. The character David, and that was Ezra's middle name actually, has
mm,
this monologue about what is cool, what actually is cool. And I think the desire to be cool, when Ezra and I were like little freaks, we were little artist freaks trying to exist in, we didn't have a lot of friends. I mean, we were very creative kids, but we weren't like necessarily normal. We were not abnormal, but we weren't,
mm.
and
Are
I
we ever?
were we ever? And I think everybody who goes into film or theater is kind of a little bit of a misfit. But there was this thing about Sean Connery where he was a little bit different. I mean, he was Scottish. He wasn't American. He was a little bit dangerous, um, but also so cool. There was something
Mm,
like ultra cool about him. And we had a scene in the play where I mean, we had an exploding briefcase. We had the Avengers umbrellas coming down from the sky. We had all this. We had trap doors where James Bond popped out of. But that sense of James Bond and George Hertzberg, who was actually in Buffy the Vampire Slayer as a monster for years,
mm,
played it with such cool with a white dinner jacket and this, but also with that sense of being bisexual. Like he danced with Miriam, the sister, and he held David as he was dying, and there was this sense that he was the coolest, sexiest. And his main message to us was, we were like, we got to get the jetpack, we've got to get this. And he said, no, no, no. What you need is to be brave. Just be brave.
mm.
And I think in the end, that's the message, is to be brave. And
Yeah.
and I think that Sean Connery was a classy, classy, classy Bond. I didn't go in for some of the others. I wasn't a big fan of, some of the ones in the middle. I think Daniel Craig brought the cool back, but like, as I say, I'm looking forward to the next one.
You can't beat the original. I
But
find
no,
I always
yeah,
ask people, right? I feel like favorite James Bond is always a good question to ask because usually there's always a personal element to it. You've either grown up,
yeah,
there's a big
yes,
connection,
yes,
and you
yes.
can't go wrong with cool.
And then, I've had heated arguments with people really strangely about whether he was drinking vodka or gin martinis. And there was a whole thing on the West Wing about President Bartlett saying that if it was shaken, not stirred, it was actually, he was ruining a good martini because he was breaking the ice and it was watery. I mean, I've had these kind of James Bond conversations about martinis over the years. But I mean, there's something about, and also in the age of AIDS, we look to our entertainers, we look to drag queens, we look to the Halloween parade, we look to
Mm,
people to bring us up and out of it, fashion, everything that would take us out of the misery. And Sean Connery as James Bond was one of those classy things that that striving for coolness, that striving for rising above the fray. And that's something Ezra and I wanted as little kids. And certainly when he was dying, and AIDS was such a horrible, cruel
mm,
disease. I mean, just so cruel. And, you know, it was, I remember, yeah, when he was dying, I said, it's a rough road, huh? And he said, yeah, don't take it. There was that sense of like, yeah, I know this is not, and he still had his sense of humor,
mm.
but but yeah, this was a very rough time for all
Yeah.
of us, especially those of us who consider ourselves, queer or allies of queerness. It's just it's important that we don't forget the history.
Yeah. And well said. And I don't know if you heard it, but my cat is running somewhere here. And as you were
Oh,
finishing up, she let out a resounding meow. So
oh,
she's
that
also
makes me
definitely
so
in support.
happy. Oh, that's great. Oh, that makes me so happy.
She's
Yes.
absolutely in support of that as well.
Oh, good.
Well, Jessica, thank you so much. I know that Secret Agents comes out Monday, October 13th at 7 p.m. And that's going to be at the Episcopal Actors Guild. And don't forget, we've got a few more readings. They will be
Yes.
presented for free October and November Mondays, and it's all out of pocket. So donations can be made in cash or checks when you make it to the reading. There's also our Give Butter campaign at egoactus.com. Jessica, would you like to say anything else for our listeners?
I'm just really thrilled that you're doing this. I think it's incredible that you're help lifting the voices of women writers. I think it's fantastic that Joan and Bruce decided to do this. And, I've known Joan for many years, and it's great to be collaborating with her. The actor playing James Bond is also in the play I just finished writing. So it's a family, and we keep coming around to each other. And for me, art is what is going to change things, and we just have to stay courageously generous.
Be brave.
Be
As you
brave,
say, be
as
brave.
James, as Bond said. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jessica.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.